In the deepest shadows of the city, there lived a man named Jun-sung. He was the king of a world where mercy was a sin and silence was survival. Jun-sung had 3 rules that kept his pulse steady in a world of blades. Rule 1, never show weakness. Rule 2, never trust an outsider. Rule 3, never let anyone close enough to see the cracks in his armor. Jun-sung was a man of cold marble and expensive silk. He believed that the world was divided into those who belonged and those who did not. To him, the streets of Seoul were for his people alone, and his prejudice was a shield he wore with pride. He ruled with a fist that never trembled, and his word was law from the docks to the penthouses. Politicians bowed so low their foreheads kissed the cold floor, and rivals vanished like smoke in the wind. Jun-sung thought he was untouchable. He thought his life was a masterpiece of control. But life has a way of laughing at kings. Even the strongest wall has a loose stone, and Jun-sung's loose stone was his 78-year-old grandmother, Madame Kang. She was the only person in the world who didn't fear the monster he had become. She saw the rot in his soul, the way his hate was turning him into a hollow man, and she decided it was time for a change. Madame Kang lived in a traditional hanok house that stood defiantly against the skyscrapers. It was a place of wood, paper, and ancient secrets. One evening, as the rain drummed against the roof, she invited Jun-sung for soup. But this was no ordinary meal. Jun-sung sat across from her, his presence filling the small room with a dangerous energy. He had just negotiated a deal with the Yakuza, and his mind was on territory and ships. He didn't notice the fire in his grandmother's eyes until she slammed her brass spoon against the table. The sound was like a gunshot. "You are going on a blind date," she barked, her voice cracking like a whip. Jun-sung didn't move, but his eyes narrowed. "I am busy Friday," he replied, his voice a low, warning growl. Madame Kang didn't blink. "You are busy being a statue," she shot back. 32 years old and you have the emotional range of a refrigerator. You wear suits that cost more than my first house, but you are poor in everything that matters." She pointed her ladle at him like a loaded weapon. "Your grandfather would be ashamed. He built this business to provide for a family, not to house a ghost." Jun-sung's jaw tightened. The mention of his grandfather was a low blow, a sharp blade through his ribs. He looked at the woman who had raised him, searching for a way out, but Madame Kang held the ultimate weapon, his inheritance. "Go on this date," she said, "or I am giving everything to your cousin Minho, the one who sells novelty socks on the internet." Jun-sung nearly choked. Minho was a man who cried at commercials and spent his days taking pictures of his own feet. The thought of his billion-dollar criminal empire falling into the hands of a sock salesman was a nightmare he couldn't allow. "One date," Jun-sung conceded, his voice heavy with defeat. "One date and you leave my will alone." Madame Kang's smile was as sharp as a razor. "Friday night, Myeongdong, 7 o'clock. Don't be late." Jun-sung felt a sense of dread. In his grandmother's vocabulary, a nice girl could be anything from a spy to a K-pop star. "Is she Korean?" he asked cautiously, his internal biases already searching for a way to categorize this intrusion. Madame Kang's eyes gleamed with a secret triumph. "American," she said simply. Jun-sung's mind raced through the implications. American meant unpredictable. American meant someone outside his carefully controlled world. American meant complications he didn't want while managing territory disputes and weapons shipments. But then she dropped the final bombshell. And she is black. Jun-sung's brain stuttered to a halt. He sat frozen, his mind struggling to process a reality that flew in the face of everything he believed. He had never associated with anyone so far outside his circle. He had spent his life looking down on those who were different. "Problem?" Madame Kang asked, her gaze piercing through his discomfort. "No," Jun-sung lied, though his skin felt tight. He was being tested, and he knew it. He didn't know then that this test would be the end of his world and the beginning of his life. While Junsung was brooding in his glass tower, a woman named Imani was finishing her shift in a small, vibrant kitchen in Itaewon. Imani was a woman of fire and flavor. 3 years ago, she had moved from Atlanta to Seoul to open a soul food restaurant. People told her she was crazy. They said a black woman cooking Southern food in the heart of Korea would never survive. But Imani didn't just survive, she thrived. She had learned 3 important truths. Korean grandmothers were the toughest critics, spice was a universal language, and her existence was a beautiful disaster waiting to happen. She was a chef who cooked with her heart, blending the smoky flavors of the South with the spicy kick of the East. She was exactly the storm Junsung never saw coming. Imani had heard about the date from her neighbor, Mrs. Park, who was friends with Madam Kang. "He is a businessman," Mrs. Park had told her. "Very handsome, very rich, very probably boring." Imani laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled her small restaurant. She expected a man in a stiff suit who would spend the whole night wondering why he was sitting across from her. She was used to the stares and the whispers, but she never let them dim her light. She decided to go on the date not for the money, but for the story. She wore a hanbok, the traditional Korean dress, but she had it custom-made with vibrant African wax print fabrics, bold oranges, deep blues, and shimmering golds. It was a statement of who she was, a bridge between 2 worlds. The restaurant Junsung chose was upscale, a place of hushed cones and minimalist decor. He arrived 15 minutes early, positioning his bodyguards in the shadows. He was prepared for an assassination attempt, but he was not prepared for Imani. When she walked through the door at exactly 7 o'clock, the air in the room seemed to change. The vibrant colors of her hanbok drew every eye. She carried a Tupperware container like it was a designer handbag, and she walked with the confidence of someone who owned the floor beneath her feet. She sat down across from Junsung without waiting for an invitation and smiled. It was the widest, most genuine smile Junsung had seen in years. "You must be Junsung," she said in Korean, her accent thick but her voice clear. "Your grandmother said you look like you haven't eaten a vegetable since the 90s. I brought collard greens with extra spice. Consider it a cultural exchange." Junsung's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked at the plastic container on the white linen tablecloth. He looked at her locks, styled elegantly with traditional ribbons. He looked at her eyes, which were bright with a mischief he couldn't categorize. You speak Korean," he managed to say. Imani laughed. "I've been here 3 years, honey. I run a kitchen. I have to speak the language if I want the delivery guys to respect the heat." Junsung felt the cold wall around his heart crack just a little. She was breaking his rules without even trying. She wasn't showing weakness, she was showing life. "I'll have the galbi," said Junsung to the waiter, trying to regain control. "I'll have the galbi jim," Imani interrupted cheerfully, "and tell the chef to make it extra spicy. My grandmother's hot sauce recipe is at home, but I think I can handle whatever he's got." The waiter's eyes went wide as he looked at Junsung for permission. Junsung just nodded, feeling like he was caught in a whirlwind. "So," Imani said, leaning back and studying him with an unsettling directness, "your grandmother told me you're in business. What kind? The vague, boring kind, or the kind that involves a lot of midnight phone calls and tax evasion?" Junsung stiffened. "Import-export," he said, the standard lie. Imani nodded slowly, a knowing smirk on her lips. "Right, so you own nightclubs and probably some stuff you don't want to talk about. Don't worry, I'm not a cop. I'm just a chef who's good at reading people and terrible at minding my own business." Junsung felt a spark of irritation, but also a strange sense of relief. No one talked to him like this. People either feared him or wanted something from him. Imani seemed to want nothing but the truth. She pushed the Tupperware toward him. "Try them. Real greens. They'll do more for your soul than that expensive suit." Junsung hesitated. His prejudice told him to reject her, to walk away from this unpredictable woman. But the smell was intoxicating, smoky, spicy, and deep. He took a bite, and his eyes widened. It tasted like two completely different worlds had decided to become best friends. It's good, he admitted. Good? Honey, it's a revelation, Imani said with a wink. As they ate, she told him stories about her first month in Seoul, about accidentally ordering pig intestines instead of pork belly, and how the local Ajuma had laughed at her until she tasted Imani's fried chicken. Jun-sung found himself listening, really listening. He told her about the pressure of the family legacy, about the rules he lived by, and the weight of the crown he wore. For the first time in years, he wasn't Jun-sung, the mafia boss. He was just Jun-sung. But the shadows of his world were never far away. As they were finishing their meal, Jun-sung's phone buzzed. A message from his head of security. Problem. Parking garage. Now. He looked up and saw 3 men entering the restaurant. They wore expensive suits, but they couldn't hide the predatory way they moved. Jun-sung recognized the leader, Hyuk, a rival who had been making aggressive moves into his territory. This wasn't a coincidence. This was an ambush. Jun-sung's blood went cold, but his mind went into battle mode. I need to use the restroom, he said smoothly, trying to protect Imani. But Imani wasn't fooled. She saw his eyes change. She saw the way his hand moved toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. You look like you just saw a ghost with a grudge, she whispered. What's going on? Hyuk spotted them and began walking toward their table, his smile the kind a shark wears before it bites. Jun-sung see, Hyuk said, his voice oily and false. I didn't know you had a taste for exotic imports. The insult was thick with the same racism Jun-sung had lived by, but hearing it directed at Imani made a fire ignite in his chest. He stood up slowly, positioning himself between Hyuk and the woman who had just made him laugh. Hyuk, Jun-sung said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. You are a long way from home. You should leave before the Han River gets a new resident. But Hyuk didn't move. He looked at Imani with a sneer. And who is this? Your new mascot? Before Jun-sung could react, Imani stood up. She didn't look afraid. She looked annoyed. Hi, I'm Imani, she said, her Korean sharp and clear. You must be the associate Jun-sung forgot to mention, the one with the bad attitude and the cheap cologne. We're in the middle of a date. Can a testosterone contest wait until after dessert? Hyuk blinked, clearly not expecting the outsider to talk back. One of his bodyguards reached toward his jacket, and Jun-sung's hand tightened on his weapon. The restaurant went silent. Other diners began to scramble for the exits. Are you guys here for the bibimbap? Imani continued, oblivious to the imminent violence, or perhaps just ignoring it. Because let me tell you, their gochujang is weak. I make better sauce in my sleep. Hyuk's face flushed red. You stupid. He reached for Imani's arm, and that was the last mistake he made that night. Jun-sung moved faster than thought. He grabbed Hyuk's wrist with enough force to make the bone grind. Touch her, Jun-sung growled, and you won't leave this restaurant alive. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Hyuk's bodyguards reached for their guns, but Jun-sung's security materialized from the shadows, weapons drawn. It was a standoff that threatened to turn the upscale restaurant into a bloodbath. Imani sighed dramatically. Great, now the greens are getting cold. She grabbed her Tupperware container and swung it with the casual efficiency of someone who worked in busy kitchens for 15 years. The heavy plastic connected with the nearest bodyguard's head with a satisfying thunk. The man stumbled, dazed. Run! Jun-sung shouted, grabbing Imani's hand. They burst through the kitchen doors, startling the chefs, and ran into the back alley just as Jun-sung's driver pulled up, tires squealing. They dove into the car as bullets shattered the brickwork behind them. Go! Jun-sung barked. As the car sped away, Imani sat back and smoothed her hanbok. She turned to Jun-sung and said, So when you said import-export, you meant crime boss, didn't you? Jun-sung, still holding her hand without realizing it, could only nod. Imani nodded slowly. Cool, cool. Your grandmother definitely left that part of the dating profile. I thought you just sold high-end electronics. Jun-sung looked at her, truly looked at her. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't crying. She was checking to see if her Tupperware was cracked. They arrived at Jun-sung's penthouse, a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the river. It was a cold, beautiful place that felt more like a museum than a home. Imani walked in and immediately began opening cabinets. "What are you doing?" Jun-sung asked, his mind still racing with the adrenaline of the escape. "I'm looking for a pot," she said. "I'm terrified, but I'm also hungry, and I need to finish these greens." Jun-sung watched her move through his kitchen, a place he had never actually used. He had 3 bottles of expensive whiskey and a single piece of convenience store kimbap in the fridge. "This is depressing," Imani said, staring at the empty shelves. "You're a billionaire who eats like a college student. No wonder you're so grumpy." She found a pot still wrapped in plastic and started heating up the greens. Jun-sung sat at the marble island, watching her. "You should leave Seoul," he said seriously. "Hyuk saw you. That makes you a target." Imani spun around, wooden spoon in hand. "Leave Seoul? Leave my restaurant? Leave the life I spent 3 years building because some gangster with a bad haircut tried to crash our date?" She pointed the spoon at him. "I didn't leave Atlanta when things got tough, and I'm sure as hell not leaving because of you. Besides, your grandmother will kill me if I abandon you now. She's been coming to my restaurant twice a week for 2 months just to vet me." Jun-sung sat back, stunned. "She what?" Imani smiled wickedly. "She's a regular. Always orders the mac and cheese with extra spice. She told me her grandson was a good boy who lost his way. She didn't mention the gunfights." Jun-sung realized then that his grandmother had orchestrated every detail. She had chosen Imani because she knew only a woman with that much fire could melt the ice around his heart. "She is diabolical," Jun-sung muttered. Imani laughed and pushed a plate toward him. "Eat. You look like you need vegetables and a reality check." As they ate in the quiet of the penthouse, the silence wasn't cold anymore. It was filled with the smell of smoky greens and the presence of someone who wasn't afraid of him. Jun-sung found himself talking about things he had buried years ago, the death of his father, the betrayal that had made him stop trusting people, and the loneliness of the throne he sat on. Imani listened, really listened. She told him about her own struggles, about being an outsider in a city that didn't always want her there, and how she had made it home anyway. "Being an outsider is a superpower, Jun-sung," she said softly. "It means you get to choose which rules to follow and which ones to break." Jun-sung looked at her, and for the first time in 15 years, he saw a future that wasn't just shades of gray. He saw colors he hadn't known existed. But the world outside was still dangerous. Hyuk wouldn't stop until Jun-sung was dead or humiliated. Jun-sung knew he had to end the threat, but he also knew he couldn't do it the old way. He couldn't just use violence. He had to use strategy. And for the first time, he wanted to win not just for the empire, but for the woman sitting across from him. The next morning, Jun-sung's penthouse was a hive of activity. His lieutenants were confused to see a woman in a colorful hanbok making coffee and telling them they looked like they needed more sleep. "Who is she?" his second-in-command whispered. "She's the boss," Jun-sung said, and he realized he meant it. He spent the day coordinating with his allies, but his mind kept drifting back to Imani. She was in the kitchen, experimenting with a new sauce. "If we're going to have a war, we might as well be well-fed." Jun-sung laughed. It was a rusty sound, but it felt good. He decided to call a meeting of the 5 families, the leaders of the Seoul underworld. He wanted to propose a truce, a new way of doing business that didn't involve constant bloodshed. But he knew Hyuk would try to sabotage it. He needed a way to prove that his new path wasn't a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. Imani watched him as he paced the floor. "You're thinking too much like a gangster," she said softly. "Think like a chef. If the ingredients are wrong, you don't just keep stirring, you change the recipe." Jun-sung looked at her, a plan forming in his mind. He would host the meeting at Imani's restaurant. He would show them the world he wanted to protect. He would show them that the outsider they despised was the one who had saved him. It was a gamble that could cost him everything, but as he looked into Imani's eyes, he knew it was the only way. The night of the meeting arrived. Imani's restaurant was small, but it was filled with the smell of home. The leaders of the 5 families arrived one by one, their bodyguards lining the street. They were skeptical, their eyes darting around the humble space. Hyuk arrived last, his face bruised from the Tupperware incident. He looked at Imani with pure hatred. You brought us to a soup kitchen? He sneered. Jun-sung stood at the center of the room, calm and resolute. I brought you to a place of truth, he said. We have spent years killing each other for scraps. While we fight, the world changes. We need a new way. Imani began serving the food, fried chicken with a gochujang glaze, cornbread with honey, and the famous greens. The leaders hesitated, but the smell was too good to resist. As they ate, the tension in the room began to soften. Spice has a way of leveling the playing field. Even Hyuk couldn't deny the quality of the meal. This is Imani, Jun-sung said, placing a hand on her shoulder. She is an American. She is black. And she is the woman who showed me that our rules are our own prisons. Hyuk slammed his hand on the table. This is an insult. You are soft, Jun-sung. You have let this woman poison your mind. He reached for his gun, but before he could draw, Imani was there. She didn't have a weapon. She had a pot of boiling hot sauce. Sit down, Hyuk, she said, her voice like ice, or I'll show you what real heat feels like. I've worked in kitchens hotter than your little gang wars. You don't scare me. The other leaders looked at Imani, then at Jun-sung, then at each other. They saw a woman who stood her ground against a killer without flinching. They saw a leader who was willing to bet his life on a new vision. One by one, they began to nod. The food is good, the oldest leader said, wiping his mouth, and the woman has spirit. Perhaps Jun-sung is right. We are tired of the blood. Hyuk looked around, realizing he was alone. He stormed out, swearing revenge, but the truce was held. The 5 families agreed to a new council, a way to settle disputes without war. Jun-sung had won, but not with a gun. He had won with a meal and the courage of the woman he loved. As the restaurant cleared out, Imani slumped into a chair. That was more stressful than a Sunday brunch rush, she joked. Jun-sung sat beside her and took her hand. You saved me again, he said. Imani smiled. I just protected my business. Can't have people shooting up the place. It's bad for the Yelp reviews. Jun-sung laughed and pulled her close. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be threats, and his own prejudices would take time to fully fade. But he was no longer a ghost in a silk suit. He was a man with a heart, and he was ready to fight for a world where Imani belonged. He realized that the nice girl his grandmother had promised was exactly what he needed, someone who didn't follow his rules, but taught him better ones. Weeks passed, and the story of the Tupperware truce spread through the city. Jun-sung was no longer just the king of the underworld. He was a man who walked the streets of Itaewon with a smile. He spent his days at the restaurant, helping Imani prep and learning the secrets of Southern spice. He found that he was good at chopping vegetables, his precision with a knife finally being used for something productive. Madam Kang was a constant visitor, always complaining that the cornbread wasn't sweet enough just to see Imani roll her eyes. I told you he was a good boy, she would whisper to Imani. He just needed someone to throw a pot at him. Jun-sung would just shake his head and keep chopping. He had found a peace he never thought possible. But the peace was shattered on a rainy Tuesday morning. Hyuk, desperate and alone, had gathered a group of mercenaries. He didn't care about the truce anymore. He only cared about burning Jun-sung's world down. They attacked the restaurant at dawn, before the city was awake. Jun-sung and Imani were alone in the kitchen, prepping for the day. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the dining room. Jun-sung grabbed his weapon, his old instincts flaring. Stay in the walk-in fridge, he told Imani. But Imani grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet. Not a chance, Jun-sung. This is my kitchen, and nobody messes with my kitchen. The fight was brutal. Hyuk's men were professionals, but they weren't prepared for a man fighting for his home and a woman fighting for her soul. Jun-sung moved with grace and ferocity that reminded the world why he had been the king. He took down the mercenaries one by one, using the tight space to his advantage. Imani was a whirlwind, her skillet ringing out like a bell as it connected with heads and limbs. She used the environment, hot oil, heavy pots, and blinding spices to neutralize the threats. Finally, it was just Jun-sung and Hyuk. They faced each other in the center of the kitchen, surrounded by the ruins of Imani's hard work. Hyuk was bleeding, his eyes wild. "You destroyed everything," he screamed. "I'll kill you both."
He lunged with a knife, but Jun-sung was faster. He disarmed Hyuk and pinned him against the wall. He could have ended it then. He could have fulfilled his old rules and eliminated the threat. But he looked at Imani, who was standing there, breathing hard, her eyes full of concern. He realized that if he killed Hyuk here, he would be bringing the darkness back into her light. He lowered his weapon. "No," said Jun-sung, "I won't kill you. That's the old way. You're going to prison, Hyuk, and you're going to spend the rest of your life knowing that you lost to a chef."
The police arrived shortly after, called by the neighbors. Huck and his men were hauled away in chains. The restaurant was a mess, but the structure was sound. Jun-sung and Imani stood in the middle of the debris, exhausted. Imani looked at her broken plates and dented pots. "I'm going to need a lot of new equipment," she sighed. Jun-sung pulled her into his arms. "I'll buy you the best kitchen in the world. I'll buy you anything you want." Imani looked up at him and smiled. "I don't want a new kitchen, Jun-sung. I want this one. I want our life. Just promise me one thing." Jun-sung nodded. "Anything." Imani's eyes twinkled. "Promise me no more mafia meetings during dinner service. It really messes with the vibe." Jun-sung laughed, a deep, joyful sound that echoed through the empty restaurant. "I promise. From now on, I'm just the assistant chef." They spent the rest of the day cleaning up, helped by Jun-sung's lieutenants and the local ajumas. It was a community effort, a testament to the bridge they had built. As the sun set, they reopened the doors. The line was around the block. People had heard about the fight and wanted to show their support. Jun-sung stood at the door, greeting people not with a cold stare, but with a nod of respect. He was still a powerful man, but his power now came from the love and loyalty of those around him. As the months turned into a year, the transformation was complete. Jun-sung had used his resources to revitalize the neighborhood, building community centers and supporting small businesses. He had become a protector of the people, a man who used his influence for good. Imani's restaurant had become the heart of the city, a place where people of all backgrounds came together to share a meal and a story. They were a symbol of hope, a proof that even the deepest prejudices could be overcome with courage and a little bit of spice. One evening, Jun-sung and Imani were sitting on the roof of the penthouse, looking out over the glittering lights of Seoul. The city looked different to Jun-sung now. It didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like a home. "You know," Jun-sung said, taking a sip of his drink, "my grandmother was right. I was emotionally constipated." Imani laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder. "She was right about a lot of things, but mostly she was right about us." Jun-sung looked at her, the woman who had shattered his rules and rebuilt his world. He realized that his 3 rules had been replaced by a new set of principles. Rule 1, protect those you love. Rule 2, trust those who prove their worth. Rule 3, never be afraid to let the world see who you really are. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the nice girl who had walked into his life with a Tupperware container and changed everything. Their wedding was the event of the decade. It was held in a garden under a canopy of cherry blossoms. It was a beautiful fusion of cultures, Korean drums and Southern gospel, kimchi and cornbread. Madam Kang sat in the front row, looking like a queen. She had a new brass spoon, and she used it to tap along to the music. Jun-sung stood at the altar, looking at Imani as she walked toward him. She wore a white silk hanbok with intricate African embroidery. She looked like a dream, a beautiful disaster that had become his greatest blessing. When they said their vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Even Jun-sung's toughest lieutenants were seen wiping their eyes. They had watched their boss transform from a cold killer into a man of heart, and they were proud to follow him. The celebration lasted all night, a riot of color, sound, and flavor. It was a night when the walls of the city truly came down. After the wedding, Jun-sung and Imani took a long trip to Atlanta. Jun-sung wanted to see where she had come from, to understand the roots of the fire that had saved him. He met her family, a large, loud, and loving group that welcomed him with open arms. He learned to cook from her grandmother, a woman who reminded him a lot of Madam Kang. He found that the spirit of the South and the spirit of the East were not so different after all. Both were built on resilience, family, and the power of a good meal. When they returned to Seoul, they found that their influence had spread. Other leaders were following Jun-sung's example, turning away from violence and toward community building. The underworld was being replaced by something new, something better. Imani's restaurant was more successful than ever, and they had opened a second location in a different part of the city. Jun-sung was still the assistant chef, but he had also become a mentor to young people in the neighborhood, teaching them that their background didn't define their future. One day, a young man walked into the restaurant. He was nervous, his eyes darting around. He reminded Jun-sung of himself years ago, full of anger and fear. Jun-sung sat him down and gave him a plate of greens. "Eat," Jun-sung said, "and let me tell you a story about a man who thought he knew everything and the woman who proved him wrong." The young man listened, his eyes widening as Jun-sung spoke. He saw a man who was powerful but kind, a man who had chosen a different path. It was the first of many such stories. Jun-sung had realized that his legacy wouldn't be the empire he built, but the lives he changed. And Imani was right beside him, her laughter a constant reminder of the joy they had found. They were the king and queen of a new kind of world, a world where everyone had a seat at the table. As the years passed, Madame Kang grew older, but her spirit never faded. She remained the matriarch of the family, her wisdom a guiding light for Jun-sung and Imani. She lived to see her great-grandchildren, two beautiful, vibrant children who were the perfect blend of their parents. They spoke Korean and English, and they loved kimchi and mac and cheese in equal measure. Jun-sung would watch them play in the garden of the Hanok house, and his heart would overflow with a peace he never thought possible. He would look at Imani and marvel at the journey they had taken. They had faced threats, prejudices, and the ghosts of their pasts, and they had come out stronger. Their love was a beacon, a proof that the world could be a better place if we just had the courage to try. One afternoon, Madame Kang called Jun-sung to her side. She was weak, but her eyes were still sharp. "You did well, Jun-sung," she whispered. "You found your way." Jun-sung took her hand. "I didn't find it alone, Halmione. You showed me the way. You gave me Imani." Madame Kang smiled. "I just gave you a nudge. You were the one who had to walk the path, and you walked it with honor." She passed away peacefully that night, leaving behind a legacy of love and transformation. The city mourned her, but Jun-sung and Imani celebrated her life, knowing that she had achieved exactly what she set out to do. She had saved her family, and in doing so, she had helped save her city. The funeral was a celebration of Madame Kang's spirit. Thousands of people came to pay their respects, from the leaders of the 5 families to the local street vendors. It was a testament to the impact she had on the world. Jun-sung stood before the crowd, his voice steady. He said, "My grandmother believed in the power of a single action. She believed that one person could change the world if they were brave enough to care. She showed me that true strength isn't about how many people you can control, but how many people you can help." Imani stood beside him, her hand in his. They were a united front, a symbol of the new Seoul. After the funeral, they went back to the restaurant. It was quiet, the air heavy with memory. Imani began to cook, the rhythmic sounds of chopping and stirring a comfort to their souls. "She's still here, Jun-sung," Imani said softly. "Every time we serve a meal, every time we help someone, she's right there with us." Jun-sung nodded, the smell of the kitchen grounding him. He realized that the walls he had built were gone forever. He was no longer a man hiding in the shadows. He was a man living in the light. And he knew that as long as they had each other and as long as they had their kitchen, they could face anything. The city continued to change, but the restaurant remained a constant, a place of sanctuary, flavor, and soul. Years later, Jun-sung and Imani were the elders of the community. They were the ones people came to for advice and help. They were the keepers of the peace. The restaurant had been passed down to their children, who carried on the tradition with the same passion and fire. Jun-sung would often sit at a corner table, watching the bustling room with a satisfied smile. He was an old man now, his hair silver, but his eyes were still bright. He would look at the diverse crowd, people of all races, ages, and backgrounds, and he would feel a deep sense of pride. They had built a world where everyone belonged. Imani would join him, her laughter still as rich and warm as the day they met.
"What are you thinking about, Junsung?" Imani would ask. Junsung would take her hand. "I'm thinking about that first date. I'm thinking about how much I hated that Tupperware container." Imani would laugh and lean her head on his shoulder. "And now you can't live without it." Junsung would pull her close, the scent of spice and home surrounding them. "No, Imani, I can't live without you." They would sit there together, two souls who had changed a city and found themselves in the process. Their story was a legend now, a tale of the mafia boss and the chef who broke the rules and built a better world. It was a story of fire, flavor, and the power of love to shatter the strongest walls.
As the story of Junsung and Imani draws to a close, remember the lesson they taught us. The world is a complex place, full of shadows and walls. It is easy to hide behind prejudice and fear, to believe that our way is the only way. But if we have the courage to step outside our controlled worlds, if we have the audacity to trust those who are different, we can find a beauty and a strength we never imagined. Junsung's journey from a racist crime boss to a protector of the people is a reminder that no one is beyond change. It only takes one person, one moment, one meal to spark a transformation. Imani's fire was the catalyst, but Junsung was the one who had to choose to burn. Together, they created a light that reached every corner of Seoul. They showed us that the things that make us different are the very things that make us strong. They showed us that Seoul isn't about where you're from, but about the heart you put into everything you do. Their legacy lives on in every meal served in their restaurants, in every community project they started, and in the hearts of everyone who heard their story. They are the proof that a beautiful disaster can become a masterpiece of love. So, my children, as you walk through your own lives, don't be afraid of the outsiders. Don't be afraid of the spice. Be like Imani, bold, fierce, and full of flavor. And be like Junsung, brave enough to admit when you're wrong and strong enough to change. Build bridges, not walls. Cook with your soul. And never, ever let anyone tell you that you don't belong, because the world is a big, beautiful table and there is a seat for everyone. The story of the racist mafia boss and the black woman who changed his life is a gift to us all, a reminder that love is the ultimate language and that when we speak it, we can change the world. Go now and live your own stories with fire and grace. And if you ever find yourselves in Seoul, look for the little restaurant in Itaewon where the greens are smoky and the air is full of laughter. You might just find a piece of your own soul there. The end of our tale is just the beginning of yours. May you find your own Imani, and may you have the courage to let them shatter your world. Goodbye, and remember, the best flavor is always found in the most unexpected places. Would you like me to write a short epilogue about their children's first day running the restaurant?